What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Parc Ferme, the Canadian Formula One podcast, here with a full crew, and we are going to talk about Lando. We also got the rest of the Miami GP and a whole lot more on Parc Ferme, the Canadian Formula One podcast. All right, guys. So obviously there is only one way to start this recap of the Miami GP. I think it is a moment so many of us have been waiting for. Lando hitting that top step on a real race. Let's not, it wasn't a sprint race. We're going to talk about how worthy he was of this, because, there were a few caveats there, but let's talk about that later. But just first impressions, how happy were you to see Lando finally won a race? Drew?
Listen, this wasn't going to be an if Lando was going to win a race. It was going to be a when. And, I wasn't sure, just with the domination of Red Bull over the last couple of years, that it wasn't going to take, Max falling from grace in order for it to happen. And, I think the truth is that, Lando had a little bit of pace in the Miami Grand Prix. And if you look at SQ1 and SQ2, he had the fastest qualifying pace and wasn't outdone until, Q3, only by thousandths of a second, right, by Max and Charles Leclerc, right? So that, not only was Lando looking really pacey, but obviously the upgrade package for McLaren was looking really pacey. But, Lando deserves it. He's a fantastic driver. He's been shit out of luck a few times in terms of, the realities of races, being races. Things happen and weather happens and all that kind of stuff. But, the last time he was this close to winning was in Russia and Sochi in 2021, and rain happened, right? So things kind of fell in his direction instead of, out of his favor this weekend. And I think he deserves it. He's a fantastic driver. He's a great guy. And you could tell, obviously, by the love and support that he got from all the other drivers. And I think that it was well-deserved. And I think he earned it in a big way. This wasn't a meltdown by Red Bull. I think it was, him just winning because he's a great driver. And, McLaren's actually given him a car he can compete with. What do you got on this one, Ed?
I'm not gonna say that I was chopping onions while I was watching the race, but yeah, it was like the theme for the entire weekend after he won. It was just it totally changed everything. Everyone was in a good mood. All the drivers, including Max Verstappen and all of Lando's former teammates and even Lewis as well. Everyone just coming up to him. Everyone was super happy for his first win. Well deserved. Especially Zach Brown. I thought he was going to crush the life out of Lando after that hug in Parc Ferme. And yeah, I was really, really impressed with not just Lando, but also the way the strategy came through, how they responded to the crash with Logan Sargeant yet again. And yeah, I'm super, super impressed with the way the weekend went. And how we would think the typical Miami weekend would be Verstappen wins, all of the cheesy whatever, celebrities getting a ride and all that stuff. But for me, it was a good race. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Tomas?
I thought it was an okay race overall. I was very, very happy though that Lando won. It was definitely a heartfelt moment. As Drew said, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. It was very, very long overdue. I'm glad he got it. He finally won his first GP. Great strategy. Some external factors I'm sure helped him as well, like that safety car at the right moment, right time. That definitely part of the strategy, part of luck as well. It was amazing to see the whole grid coming together as one big happy family. Essentially, everyone celebrating. From Fred Vasseur to Zach Brown to Lewis Hamilton and to Max. So that was very nice. It was fun and interesting to see someone very, very different on the first place. Not our typical Max or Lewis, but Lando of all people. So it was cool. I liked it.
So for those of you that listened last week, we kind of resigned ourselves to, instead of choosing a top three, we were just going to pick the over under on whether Max was going to be 25 seconds ahead of the rest of the field or not. So did anyone choose the under? I'm not sure, but we were way off on that prediction. The second thing is obviously Lando bringing it home. I don't know about you guys when you were watching it, but part of me, as I saw the laps taking down, I was just like waiting for something to happen. I was like waiting for a fucking banana peel to come out of nowhere and just like spin his car into the wall, because he's had like so many close calls, but he managed to keep it together. And the other thing I'll say, we'll talk about the safety car a little bit, but I think he won this race on merit. Like, that McLaren was fast, and even when they had 20 laps left or 15 laps left, Max wasn't catching him, and Lando would continue to put time and space between himself and the Red Bull. So for whatever reason, Red Bull wasn't performing, or wasn't as dominant as it had been at previous tracks, and maybe it was the upgrades that McLaren brought. But just echoing what everyone else said, it was really nice to see everybody come together, see everybody happy for him, and I think that speaks volumes for who he is and how well he's liked across teams, across whatever boundaries, because everyone was pretty pumped for him. Ed, you touched on Logan Sargeant going into the wall, speaking of the safety car, and you just I feel like the way you kind of said it, you were blaming Logan, right? And obviously he got in a bit of a tangle with Magnussen, and Magnussen was tangling with fucking everybody, it seems like, over this weekend / the last couple of weeks. Like, I'm not really sure if he's trying to show how hard he can race and trying to get a seat for next year, or if he's just trying to drive his way out of the series, because if he wasn't the most hated driver on the track prior, if Lance had that crown before, I feel like he's vying for that. He's trying to win one title, and maybe it's most hated. I'm not really sure. Want to get your thoughts on that, Drew?
Yeah, like, I don't know if it's because he's like a little bit butthurt because Nico's got a drive over at Sauber, and he's like, well, I should have deserved a drive. But like, his elbows were out the entire sprint race. His elbows were out the entire race. Like, he was fighting with Hammy. He was obviously, fighting with everybody. And like, it wasn't even cute, right? Like, it was like aggressive and dangerous. And like, if the other drivers like played the exact same game, there would have been contact, and like, these guys would have wrecked cars. And I just think that, like, after you get the certain amount of penalty points, like, he got penalty points even after he got penalty points. Like, they were still deciding on one, and then another thing was under investigation. So, like, I don't know about these penalties, because what's happening is that, like, drivers are just like, well, I'm already screwed, so I might as well take someone out with me, right? And if it's one of those kind of mindsets, like, if they're not penalized on their next race, then I don't think that there's any sort of, like, they're already like, well, whatever, this race is shot, so I might as well do X, Y, and Z to take whoever out with me. So, like, just that attitude, I think, is a dangerous one in Formula One, especially when you get somebody like K-Mag who's going to run with it. And I don't know if that's because he knows that, like, his time in F1, like you mentioned, is over now, or if he's just trying to be aggressive so that, I don't know, he gets attention, because, like, I guess we're talking about him, so he won that way. But I think that, there's other ways to do it. And, if we want to talk about, like, drivers not showing up when they need to, I think K-Mag's doing that, right? Like, he showed up, I guess, in this defensive mode, in the first and second races of the year, when they had the pit stop issue with Nico Hulkenberg, and he was trying to hold back the pack and successfully did it, right? But this is inherently that problem. And, now they're doing he's doing other versions of that same kind of style and tactic of racing. And I just think that, it's dangerous and it's not very sportsmanlike. So I guess that's kind of my 2 cents on K-Mag this week. And I think he's my nomination for worst driver of the weekend.
So as we're exploring this, does any part of his, so I think you bring up a good point, because, once you get those penalties in the race, you're racking up like 20-second penalties. Like, it doesn't matter. I don't know if there are any precedents at this point for taking away championship, like constructor points, for like bad behavior on track, or grid penalties. I know obviously you get grid penalties when you're like replacing engines or power units or things like that, but it would be interesting to see them take another look at the rules and like how they enforce the punishments, to give them something to look forward to. That's probably going to be more of a repellent, because to your point, I think it's just he was, it went beyond like elbows out to hard racing. It just went like kind of reckless and kind of stupid, right? And sadly, as much as we shit on Logan Sargeant, it took him out of his home race. And, as much as we blame him for basically everything that happens to him, I think at that point it was just Kevin putting his car in a shitty place where it should have been. And he had been aggressive all weekend. And this was no different. Aside from that, I felt that this weekend was, it felt good. And that's not something I would normally say about Miami, because I've never been a huge fan of like the pomp and everything that happens around Miami and like the stars. It becomes more about the show than the sport. And we've had that conversation before. I feel like this was different. I really enjoyed the sprint race. I enjoyed the actual race itself. I feel like that track is kind of coming into its own, and drivers are understanding, how to really exploit it. But I kept coming back to this weekend being like really feel good, because you saw Danny Rick, at least in the sprint race, be competitive, qualified well, finished fourth. Saw Lewis in the race, he was still sixth, or he finished sixth, but it was still, it looked like a more competitive car, something that could at least, chase down a few people and where there would be competitive driving. Were there any other pleasant surprises for anyone here from this race that you want to touch on?
No, I think that, Ferrari was just whelming. Like, I think they had, a great pit stop. They had their first sub 2-second pit stop, but I did want to touch on Ferrari's kind of like ability or inability to kind of do these like fake pit stop kind of things, like over the radio. And like, you had Max and I guess Piastri at the time ahead of them, and they were kind of like trying to get Piastri to pit a little bit. So they like put the guys out there on the pit wall in order to like quote unquote change, come in for a pit. But like they'd already passed the pit window or the pit lane, right? So like it wasn't going to happen. The guys came out and they didn't even have tires in their hands. Like it was the worst psych out ever. I think it was one of those like kind of college footballs, like, oh, we've got a trick play. We've never ran it before, but let's try it in a Grand Prix. And they did it. And, Crofty and Martin Brundle on the, I guess the global version of the F1 channel, they were just cutting them up. They couldn't even like help themselves from being like, this is the worst pit fake ever, like to go down. And I don't know if it's an honorable mention, but I think it deserved a mention that, Ferrari, despite not being super crazy fast in this race, like I thought they were struggling behind the Red Bull and they were struggling behind the McLaren. They've got their other half in order, which is like, technical side. They got their tire strategy in order. They can absolutely execute a tire swap pit stop, and their strategy calls are more on point this year, because like historically last year and the year before we had absolutely just shit all over Ferrari because they couldn't get anything right in the race. So that's obviously a step forward. I would have loved to have seen Ferrari be a little bit more competitive in this track, but obviously Red Bull was struggling too, and I don't think Mercedes and Aston Martin look great. Like I would argue that Aston Martin did not deserve a point at all. And Fernando Alonso managed to will his way into the points. And I just, I don't know. I think Ferrari deserves a little bit of an applause for getting everything right, except for that fake out pit stop thing. So what do you got on that one, Tomas?
It was a little bit of shitty call, like basically what you said, Drew. Like I think even Martin Brundle or one of the guys said it's almost like not necessarily maybe breaking the rules, but essentially you can't have your pit crew unless like the car is actually stopping or something. So it was very, very poorly played. And when that happened, I was like, come on, Ferrari, like you're going back to your old ways. You look like clowns again. So that could have been played way better. But overall, I know maybe like a couple episodes or last season, we're talking about how Fred Vasseur, came into this team, and we're talking if he's gonna essentially with no experience leading a big team, grand team, if he's going to make a big difference. And so far, it seems like he's making the difference. They're more well structured together as a team. They're making better calls, not all the time, but overall, race after race, better decisions, better calls. So they are improving, but this was like almost going back to their old ways, and it was a little bit of a clown show.
I got one good thing and a couple oops moments from the Grand Prix. One good thing, our boys at Alpine finally scored a point. So good on Ocon to finally come in and be in the points again after a few races. And then for me, specifically towards the end of the race, when Piastri and Sainz were like going at each other, the team orders were like, please go easy. We don't want another safety car so that Lando can win. That was also very interesting. But kudos to Piastri. He really, really performed the weekend. And compared to Lando, like, he was like really taking it to him as well, as teammates. But as a team in itself, like, McLaren did come out really, really strong this weekend. And I'll touch on a little bit on Logan Sargeant. I guess I was a little bit too hard on that comment earlier. It was not his fault, and even for the fact that after he got hit, his radio message to his pit was like, "Did I do something wrong?" Like, sound of despair, sound of like, "Oh man, did I do something, stupid again, or did I crash, or did I hit something?" It wasn't him. It was all Magnussen. And the reason why I touched on that is because Magnussen is now in the borderline of getting a one race ban this season, because he's accumulated about 10 penalty points, and you have a maximum of 12 penalty points within a year, and it stays for the entire year. And if you reach that 12, you get a one race ban. So we could have another replacement driver in the horizon. Maybe Ollie Bierman showing up for Haas. Who knows? Maybe Kimi Antonelli. I don't know. Could be another driver coming in from F2 to replace him, should Magnussen continue his onslaught on the entire grid. And yeah, we'll see. Could be another interesting seat change or another driver to come in and take it to the rest of the grid. You're on mute.
That's an interesting point, Ed. And to Drew's point earlier about the severity of the penalties, to me, you got to do quite a bit to rack up 12 penalty points in a 12-month period. And for me, a one race ban for a driver at the bottom of the standings, like, does that really, really mean anything? And does that also affect the team at all? Or is that just purely a ban on that driver? Because I think unless you have some pressure on the teams, on the constructors, whether it's financial, whether it's constructor points, whether it's anything like that, like, there's very little reason that Magnussen wouldn't continue to drive as he does, and he sits out a race, and like, so what? Like, what does he have to lose at this point? And so I don't really see how that is much of a deterrent, but we'll see. Maybe he'll have like a good talking to. Maybe he'll have like a little therapy session and release some anger or tension or whatever's going on with him, and just come in and drive a nice race in a couple of weeks. One of the dominant teams that we're used to seeing at the front, obviously, is Red Bull. They were up there, but it wasn't that runaway, over 25-second victory that we're used to seeing. Is this just a one-off thing for Red Bull? Are they in trouble? Have the rest of the pack caught up? Has Adrian Newey announcing his resignation automatically removes performance from that car? Is he breathing on it differently? I'm not really sure. What do you guys think?
You know what? I think that, I don't know if there's like the law of diminishing returns. Like, at one point, the person who's at the front of the grid, they can only update and get more aero and more speed and more power out of the car. Like, at one point, you can put in the same amount of effort and not get as much return. And is that offering an opportunity for the other cars to finally get things together. They've seen the Red Bull car, they've taken a look at it. Maybe they're pulling some ideas from it. Maybe they're just coming up with better their own ideas. But I think it's a combination of a couple things. These cars aren't always great on every track. And like where I saw Red Bull struggling was like they were not very front end grippy. Like they, going around the corners, Max was complaining in a big way about, just not having any sort of downforce into some of the low speed corners, which was absolutely killing them in the length of the full race. And so I think that, if McLaren is kind of that opposite to that, I think, that's where things start to magnify a little bit, where like, Red Bull looks extra bad at the same time that McLaren looks extra good, which kind of balances that out there a little bit. Do I think that, Newey announcing his, departure from Red Bull, does that make the car any slower? I don't know if it's like a psychosomatic thing, you know what I mean? Like when you are told that you, I don't know, are losing weight or something like that, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, I do feel skinny today. Is it a mental game that they're talking about?
The car having like separation anxiety. I'm not sure.
Like or are the drivers like, oh man, this isn't a Newey approved car anymore. Now it can't go so fast. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know what that looks like. But I think that there's a combination of a few things. I think, obviously that's a very street style track. It's very slick. It was super dusty there. They had a tailwind. Like there was a whole bunch of things that factored into it not being, a Red Bull optimum race. Max, was complaining the entire time. And Checo was struggling in a big way. Like even, Lewis Hamilton was stuck to the back of that second Red Bull car for the last half of the race, right? And like he wasn't able to shake him. Obviously, the straight line speed of that Mercedes is not there. So, this being in combination of this being a very difficult track to pass on in the first place, Lewis couldn't get by him. But the fact that Checo couldn't pull a gap was bananas. And then you had Lando in the front pulling a gap on Max by like, 0.3 of a second per lap. He was like, 7.5 seconds or something ahead of Max by the end. It was insane. And they were just pulling a gap. So I don't know. I think that, it will be a mostly Red Bull dominant year. And unless we have some more of these anomalies where a lot of these, older quote unquote tracks, something that's not as new as Miami. Obviously the temperature in Miami is a little bit different. The average track temperature there over the weekend was 50 degrees, right? And that's not something that they were used to running on. Then you add in the factor of the sprint race. So they obviously didn't have as much time for testing and figuring things out that way. And like, they didn't have a lot of information about those hard tires or the medium tires because they were trying to save them all for the race, right? So there was a lot of factors that played into it. But yeah, Red Bull wasn't looking so hot. To summarize that up, they weren't looking great, but I think they'll be back in full form for Imola. So we'll see. What do you got on that, Tomas?
I agree. I think it was a lot of factors going on wrong for the Red Bull, from strategy to tuning to internal affairs. To your question, Walker, if Adrian Newey leaves, let's say, today or next year, whatever it is, will it be felt right away? I don't think so. I still think they're going to dominate this season. I still think they're going to dominate the next season, possibly even half of the one after that. But eventually it is going to drop off. I mean, you can only go so high, you can only go so far, you can only be first for so long until you plateau or you start going down. So it's just a matter of time. The track was not in their favor. The racing conditions, maybe they were not really in their favor what they were hoping for. The tuning wasn't in their favor. It just was a perfect storm for Red Bull for basically a lot of things to go wrong and not their way.
Ed, do you have any comment on Red Bull? Bull's performances?
Well, for me, I think it's too early to say because we had the exact same situation. I think it was last year in Singapore. Carlos Sainz had just won, and we finally saw that the setup for Red Bull was not, ideal for Singapore. Wasn't their strongest race, and we finally saw a chink in the armor, and we all jumped on that. Everyone was like, "This is it. Red Bull is done. They are now going to be, they now have an issue with their car. They're not going to be able to really compete, and the rest of the other teams are going to start, pouncing on that. Too soon to say. I would personally say that Red Bull's not running away with this. They are going to come back again, and it has to be consistent. That, let's say, I would say like 3 or 4 races that Max Verstappen doesn't come in with a win, or at the very least, the indication if quali they're not competitive as well, then now we have an issue. Now Red Bull is having issues with either their car. Maybe it could be the sprinkle of dust that Adrian Newey is now no longer part of the team. We will not know up until the next few races. So for me, too soon to say.
So I'm just looking over the last few years at Miami. So this year, Lando finished about 7.5 seconds over Max. In 2023, Max had a 5-second lead. So not huge, not dominant. And in 2022, he had a 3.5-second lead. So it doesn't seem like it's one of those tracks where they are completely dominant, but to see the difference, track over track, considering that all the teams were kind of facing the same conditions, I'm gonna go with ignorant hope that maybe this is a sign of things to come. I'll probably be completely wrong in a couple of weeks, but I'm just gonna roll with it. I'm gonna think that between McLaren and Ferrari, they're gonna have something that they could bring to the table to maybe consistently challenge Red Bull. Probably not, but fuck it. A boy can dream.
That's it.
Boy can dream.
Hey man, I'm gonna give you props for dreaming, because look what happened to Lando. Like, honestly, you called this out earlier in the season. Like, and we had it in one of our reels. Please follow us on Instagram as well and get on the Discord. But it's like, you called it. So who knows?
If Lando can do it, if Lando can win a race, anything is possible.
And Red Bull can suck too.
Shoot for the stars.
Exactly.
I wouldn't go that far. I mean, Logan Sargeant not crashing, that's too much shooting for the stars. So
wasn't that actually your prediction last week? Wasn't it that Logan Sargeant was going to have a spectacular weekend?
He got that prediction down.
Yeah.
But the thing is, let's give him credit. It wasn't his fault. It was K-Mag.
He wasn't having an awful race. Like, if
it
was one of his better races, which is too bad, really.
Even the sprint was respectable.
Yeah.
Yes. I felt bad for him when he said, like, did I do something wrong? Like, that was on the radio. It was like, oh my God, my heart breaks for this dude. He's doing so well.
While we're on the Williams train, can we talk about how unsexy Albon looked? He was like just a hurting unit, and like obviously like it wasn't the car, because Sargeant was bad, but like he wasn't as bad. He wasn't Sargeant bad. You know what I mean?
I feel like he's had a rough few weeks. I think ever since he got Sargent's car in Australia, like he's just kind of been very, very mediocre, even for Williams.
Yeah.
Considering last year he was kind of on fire, and we all thought, oh yeah, he should be the incumbent driver, Mercedes, et cetera, et cetera. Like, he has not been putting together the kind of season that would lead you to believe that. And now looking back on what we talked about, and I feel like none of us have mentioned his name in that context at all over the last couple of months.
No,
he's just been very, very uninspiring.
Cursing and a blessing for Williams and for Albon taking Sargent's car.
I guess so. A couple of weeks ago, we debuted a brand new segment. It's called Mail Box. So it's a really simple concept. We are taking, so for those of you that listen that don't know, we have an amazing community over on our Discord channel. Link for the channel in the show notes, also on Instagram, socials, YouTube. And we love to interact. We love to chat. So anytime you guys leave us comments, questions, we'll bring them into the podcast and discuss them here. And this time we have a question from Victor, big fan of the podcast. He is asking, after the Miami race and the close call between Checo and Max on that opening corner, do you think that Red Bull is more likely to take a second look at keeping Checo as their number 2 driver Does this affect his future with the team at all? Or is it just one of those first corner fucking whoops incidents?
I think they're going to take a really good look at Perez, or I'm sorry, Carlos Sainz, because I think for me, what I saw and what I heard is that Mercedes was talking to, they're all talking to Sainz. Let's get real. The guy's driving the tires off that Ferrari this year, and he's the most eligible driver on the grid. Any team would be blessed to have that guy. And so I think Red Bull's got an offer out to him. I've heard on socials, who knows how much truth or validity of this is, but what I've learned in my short life and what I've learned in my F1 career is that most of these, I don't know, kind of debunk myth, legends, things that happen, you know, breaking news, whatever it is there's some truth to it. And so, like, do I think that Red Bull has an offer out to Sainz? 100%. Do I think that, you know, Kick Sauber, that Audi team, has an offer out to Sainz? 100%. People were saying that it was an expired offer now, that offer is dead. But I think that you just give another offer. That offer died. Okay. It doesn't mean they don't want them. They obviously wanted him enough to throw out that offer. Do I think that Red Bull is going to go after Carlos? I think they should. I think they need to really think about that, because I think if you put Carlos Sainz with the aggression and skill and passion that he's putting into that Ferrari this year and put him into a second Red Bull car, I think you got a really good duo. So yeah, I guess in short, like, if you watch the replays on that first corner and like he was millimeters away from the back end of Verstappen, could you imagine how fast Helmut Marko would have fired Checo in moments? Like, I don't even think he would have been able to get back to the pit wall and be like, contract expired. Just keep walk all the way back from Miami to Mexico.
So just to clarify that question, though, do you think he's at more at risk of losing his seat? Or do you think it was just they're looking at Carlos regardless? Like, how much does this move the needle on, like, we got to get rid of Checo?
I think out of 10, I think it probably moved it 2.
Okay.
Like 2 more points towards, you're getting a new seat. Yeah. I think it wasn't nothing, but it's...
Okay.
Yeah, it did move the needle. It moved the needle.
Thomas, what do you think?
I think there's so much speculation at this point in time, and as we all know, things change so fast. Just for example, Lewis Hamilton said, "I want to stay with Mercedes and win one more championship," and then bam, he's switching to Ferrari. My thoughts are, I think he's gonna stick around this year. I think he's gonna finish off with Red Bull. I don't think Red Bull is gonna take him for another year. As to what Drew said, yeah, everyone, Sainz is the talk of the grid. Essentially, everyone wants him, and the way how he's performing in Ferrari, and how much passion and drive he had since this year, especially, it's very, very noticeable. Red Bull would be, any team would be stupid not to throw him an offer. So he's popular. I think Checo, after this year, if he survives this year, I think he's done with Red Bull. I don't think they're going to renew his contract, and but I'm not 100% sure either that Sainz is going to be part of Red Bull either.
So I thought, before Ed answers, I just want to go back to the assignment here. The assignment is very clear. Did this incident move the needle?
Yes.
Not whether he's going to be there. It did. Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Just want to make sure we answer Victor's actual question. Otherwise, no one's going to fucking submit anything. They're like, these assholes don't answer my question. They just talk about their own shit. Ed, do you understand the assignment?
Yeah, I do. But
Okay.
the thing is, I was going to answer in the contrary. I said I think it would not move the needle.
Yeah.
It was a race incident. Like, his tires were cold. Brakes were cold. But if he did hit him, it'll move. But it was close. Nothing happened. Moving on. Consistency is what Red Bull wants. And he's consistent right now. With everything that's happening with Sainz, not to discuss. Too soon to say.
Yeah. I personally think you're all fucking crazy except Ed. I think it's just like one of those things that happens. You know what I mean? Like, if you're not going for that gap, like, same thing happened with Lewis, right? He came in a little bit slower, but he did the same thing in the sprint race, right? He came in a little hot, locked up the brakes, tagged a couple of, who did he tag? He tagged McLaren, and then this fucking a little bit of bowling, but like, what's the alternative? Like, you want him to sit back and let a bunch of people pass him? Like, I think if anything, like that's the kind of initiative you want to see from Perez, who can sometimes feel and seem a little sleepy, right? So, yeah, I agree with Ed. Ed is, on point on this one, and the rest of you are very wrong. Anyways, thank you, Victor. Really appreciate your question. And that has been this installment of before we wrap up a very entertaining Miami weekend. Drew, you already touched on the worst driver of the day. Do we all agree on K-Mag? Is he the
I think
unanimous
there's a couple
decision?
honorable mentions, though. I think Alex Albon gets an honorable mention for being a bad driver this weekend. And I think that Danny Ricciardo also gets a bad drive for the Grand Prix, because I don't think there was an excuse. There was no incidents that he was involved in. And we also saw what he was capable of on the same track the day before. So I think in terms of the Grand Prix, I think Danny Rick's getting a worst driver of the day. Not.
I wonder if he made any, like, did they make any significant setup changes? Like, that would be what I want to know. Like, did they come into like, the GP qualifying and say like, we have to make these updates, and then it just completely fucked them for the qualifying and race? I'm not sure, but it was definitely disappointing to see him like a few hours later after coming P4 just not being anywhere. Best driver of the day. Okay, this unanimous, is it Lando?
But we have to have some nominations for
like, sure. I'm just
Lando.
We got Lando.
Come on,
Lando.
What did we say?
Okay,
Lando.
All right. Honorable mentions for the day.
I want to say Valtteri Bottas just because he got the second driver of the day vote somehow. So good for him.
I think Piastri gets another one, because I think if that safety car and some poor timing didn't happen, then obviously him getting tagged at the end. I think, without those, I think he had a good shot at podium, like a real good shot, like even second place. Like, he would have been up there. He would have been where Lando was, I think, if everything played out, purposefully, without that, safety car kind of saving the day for Lando. I think that's how, Oscar was looking really sharp, and considering he had only half the upgrades that Lando did, I think he was looking real pacey.
I would say I would give it to Charles Leclerc coming into podium, even for a lackluster showing of the team. He still came in the podium, so I would give him that. I was going to say Piastri, but Drew already took it, so I don't want to copy it. I want to have my own answer, so go with Leclerc on this one.
I'm going to give my honorable mention to Tsunoda, who I think had like a quiet race, but a solid race, finishing in 7th. Which was great for that car. And I'm going to give it up to Hamilton. I feel like this is one of the first weekends where he seemed competitive, where he had like a bit of a fire in him. I feel like he was like ready to like do everything he could. Like, there was at least from what I heard, very little whining, because he can be a little whiny when his car isn't doing exactly what he wants. But I feel like he had the right focus. He had a good car relative to what Mercedes has been recently. And it was fun to watch him try and track down some cars. So we have a bit of a break. 2 weeks from now, we're over in Italy at the Emilia Romagna. Then we have Monaco. Then we're back in Canada for the Canadian local GP. If anyone has any tickets that they want to gift us for fucking our amazing podcast, media passes, anybody out there listening? No? Maybe? All right.
I'd even take like the other half of a bed in the hotel room. Like, I know they're all booked up out there. Like, I'm not getting greedy. I'll take a couch or a cot and like a
general admission. Like,
yeah. Anyways, look through the fence. Give me some binoculars. I'm good.
There we go. So we're off. The races are off for a couple of weeks, but we'll be back next week, of course. And now to end the episode, only one way we know how is name that sponsor. I'm going to name 3 sponsors. You're going to tell me the car that they're on, what they do. Really simple game. Simple, you would think, but we're all terrible at it. And by all, I mean you 3, because I answer questions. So first one up is Business Solver or Business Olver, depending on how you want to read it. I think it's Business Solver. They're just trying to be clever.
I think they're
gonna
lazy
say-
without having to make a second ass.
I'm gonna say Ferrari and something with finance, like banking or crypto.
Okay.
I'm gonna go with Haas, and I'm going to say it is like a SaaS software kind of all-in-one solution.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna say Williams, and they are a business publication or blog.
Okay, so Business Solver is an employee benefits administration technology platform. There
On.
you go. Alpine.
Okay.
There
Okay,
you go.
Hey.
Drew
There you
gets
go.
half points for that, I guess. Maybe.
There's no half
I
points
feel
in
like-
this game.
There's no half points to this game.
Yeah.
There's no
You're in
half
or you're in the way.
podiums. Yeah. Next company is Jig Space. JIG Space. Jig Space.
I'm gonna say that is on the Kick Sauber car, and it is a online platform that is kind of like a Fiverr, like a gig thing.
Oh, okay, got it. Yep.
I'm gonna say Red Bull and kind of like Salesforce, like online computer storage, online storage, essentially cloud.
I'd say VCarb architecture software.
Okay. JigSpace is an interactive 3D presentation software that anyone can use to create immersive AR demonstrations and rich product stories. No coding required.
Oh,
And they, I know, right, guys, no coding. And it is on Steak Sauber.
more non-half points.
Well, maybe we can add them up.
Okay, now I got 1 full point. I'll let your boy.
There we go. Maybe that's how we have to like modify this. Everything's just a half point. There's no full points. Everything's a half point.
But what happens
Or
if we
we
actually get a full point?
Well, then you get 1 full point because you have to get
Okay.
both components.
Fair enough. Touche.
Or
Okay.
maybe it's just each a point and each fully
Yeah.
correct answer is worth 2 points.
that I think's the play, because otherwise
Okay,
we're
there
going
we
to end
go.
up with 0 by the end of the year.
There we go. Guys, we've done this. We're professionals, don't worry. Okay. Last one is America Movil. America Movil.
I'm going to say that that's on Haas, and it is a financial institution.
I was gonna say Haas as well because America, but I was gonna say moving company or something with not necessarily logistics, but moving.
I'm going to say Williams, and I'm going to say logistics.
Okay. No points in this round. America Movil is a Mexican telecommunications corporation headquartered in Mexico City. It's the 7th largest mobile network operator in the world in terms of equity subscribers, as well as one of the largest corporations in the world. There we go. That's Checo's paycheck right there.
What
That's
car's
what that
that?
is. It's Checo's paycheck.
Oh, okay. There you go. Understood.
There you go. Red Bull. Red Bull. You know what? We should actually keep track of these points throughout the season.
Yeah,
That's the play.
that's the play. I think we should do
That
that.
is the play. Okay, so Drew, you have 2 points. Well, I'll go back and listen to the rest of them and see if anyone has been able to score
At
points
least
or
we do
not.
it at the same time every pod, so you can just fast forward it to the end of the
Yeah,
pod.
I'll go to the end.
Yeah.
Yeah, go
That's
to
good.
exactly.
Take like 5 minutes. Okay, boys.
Boys, this was fun. Thanks everybody for listening. This has been Parc Ferme, the Canadian Formula One podcast. Don't forget to rate, subscribe, leave a comment, join the Discord, find us on socials, subscribe to YouTube. Did I miss anything?
That's it, man. You got it.
Fucking nailed it.
Spanked it.
Till next week.
Ciao for now.
Ciao for now.